Shalom, brothers and sisters. Shalom. We alive now. And giving honor and praise unto the Most High, the maker of heaven and earth. This interview, not so much of a presentation, but this interview is conducted by me with the hopes and the intentions that the Most High will accept it and give it honor to He who created all things, who sees all things and is not seen, the one who judges all things and is not. We are talking of the Most High. What we want to do, brothers and sisters, in getting into this particular subject, we want to say thank you to the people who have joined on. I want to say thank you on the human level to the brother Zaccar of the tribe of Dan. And this particular subject is going to be about slavery. All right? And the matter in that particular case, if we will. Right? And the reason why I wanted to go over this is because there are some who attempt to minimize object or water it down. The brother Samal Zaccar did an excellent presentation, which is on the channel on YouTube, DCB. All right. The date of it, when you go onto its video list, is dated to February 27th, 2021. Over 3.5, 4 hours of just nothing but history out the platoon concerning slavery before the 1619 era. All right. So without any further ado, I hand the mic over to the brother, Moreh Zaccar. Tom Sheik Adom.
First and foremost, I just want to give all honest praises, respect, acknowledgement, and thanks to the great King of the universe, to the God of our fathers, to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God, the creator of all things and everything, who we must thank, because without him, with him, all things are possible, all things are due. So I thank you for the opportunity to come and discuss this topic. You know, the interesting thing about slavery is that you look at it, and it was such a trying time in American history and actually in history throughout the world. And to see a lot of the push now to minimize its impacts and its effects on those who suffered from it the most, you wonder what the goal and the objective is, but it also becomes just very frustrating, because we as a people in this country and countries all throughout the world, we suffered a lot because of the colonizers and because of the acts that were done to us from slavery. And so to now see that it minimized and to seek to change the narrative, it becomes very discouraging. So we just like to talk about it. We like to bring it out ever so often, just like how they talk about 9/11 and they talk about the towers and they say we shall never forget. Certain things we should never forget. And it's not to harbor any negative or hard feelings regarding slavery or what it is, but it's not something that we can allow to be forgotten, because the effects of slavery have a long last on us, even up into these days and times. So, you know, that's one of the major reasons that we talk about it so often.
Kane, Todarabah for that information. To collaborate on what the brother was saying, the lasting effect that it has. I still got an English name. I know people from Panama who still got a Spanish name. I know people from Haiti who still got a French name. I know of people from Brazil who have a Portuguese name. So Portuguese, Spanish, French, and English, the names that we carry, surnames or so forth, shows the colonization, shows that it does have a lasting effect on what we name our children. So these are just things we want to point out, understood for edification purposes. Without what we're going to do right now is go over this PowerPoint that was set up. All right. So that way we can get into this and just discuss it from this particular moment. Shalom. Giving honor to the Most High. Shalom. This presentation is done in order to help make known a subject that has been suppressed. Due to the matter of slavery not being a commonly liked subject, it became a matter that was not talked on much. Now, we do know, brothers and sisters, that in colleges, they do have Black study courses or Afro-American studies in which they do talk upon this subject. But as we do know and will point out, there's people who wanted to sit there and have those kind of classes taken out, like Mississippi was making a proposal for that. Now, not to hate on the state of Mississippi, we know good and well, brothers and sisters, that Mississippi wasn't into ratifying their papers under the 13th Amendment until the year 2013. So legally, until the year 2013,
Absolutely.
Mississippi was a slave state. Brazil was still involved in the slave trade in the late 1880s. There were Black congressmen in the United States when Brazil was still active in the slave trade. So while we do not deny that there were Black people, for the lack of a better term, that was inside of the Americas prior to the Atlantic slave trade, we do not want to minimalize nor forget nor make marginalize the fact of the matter where W.E.B. Du Bois is saying that it might have been as much as 30 to 40 million, and the Portuguese destroyed their records in many cases. Then you got J.A. Rogers said that it might have been 12 million. Malcolm X said it was 100 million. So looking at it in this particular case, it was way into the millions. So when the destruction of the records that happened, and with the matter of how the colonization happened, and what happened when you hear even people in Africa say they took the best out of Africa and then they went and colonized it.
Right.
So we just want to point that out for reasonable purposes. In that mood, do we present this matter to you all, so the truth, though sad, is not forgotten. Now, not all history is happy. And what we're going to talk about and present is not the happiest, let's go out and clap hands kind of moment, but we do not want to forget what has happened with us as a people. We know we didn't start in slavery, but we came through slavery. But this becomes important for us to bring out, so that way our story, the sad part even, is not forgotten. Let's go on to the next slide. All right, the brothers Zaccar and Yeshiah, both of Danite tribe, build with each other. Now, I say I'm from the tribe of Dan, of the 12 tribes of Israel, that being the fifth of the 12 tribes. All right, and in looking at it like that, the brother Zaccar is my senior. He's older than I am. You understand? So him and I, unknowing each other at the time, both winded up saying we're from the tribe of Dan. Now, ironically, there is a tribe in Liberia in Africa that say they are the tribe of Dan. You understand? These so-called Falashas don't all say that they're Dan. All of them don't say it. Some do. Some say they're Levi or Levi. So we just want to point that out for reasonable purposes. All right? Subscribe to the channel. Moreh, pardon me, Brother Zaccar, take over the mic and speak as we go through the PowerPoints. I'll relinquish the mic to you.
Not a problem. Okay. You gonna scroll through, or you want me to just kind of touch on a couple of things here and there?
No, we're going to scroll through, but if you look at the meme or the flyer that was made, this was created by the sister Fab Aim Edits. I'm going to put her name in there for those who want that kind of work done. Fab Aim Edits did this. She even did some of my book covers. You can find. Sorry, I'm gonna remove that and put the name correctly. All right, Fab Aim, not Fabian. Fab Aim Edits. All right, so what you're seeing there is a model of a slave ship that was done by the British. All right, so let us continue on in the next slide. Thank you. Zaccar Ben Dan on how he is and what we experienced. Shalom. How are you, my brother, my tribal brother, and a friend I knew for over 20 years?
God is good and well. You know, it's in these days and times, you have to thank God. I know through the pandemic and through a lot of different things that happened, a lot of us were unsure about the different things that were going on, the different things were put in place. And these are the times when you really need to connect to your spiritual side. You want to get closer to God. You want to try to get answers to things that seem just unimaginable. And the only way that you can really comfort your spirit is to be able to do that. So I'm a firm believer in getting in touch with your spirituality and getting closer to God, because that's one of the in a world of chaos, that's something that's going to give you a relative semblance of comfort and peace.
Cain. Our people, even in slavery, knew of the Most High. You understand? There were, and there's a list of people that were taken as captives, and most of the names ended in Yah.
Yeah,
Another matter is even this is Hollywood. Many Israelites have pointed out that even in the movie Amistad, the women were singing on a boat, even in a movie, saying Yahweh, Yahweh, Yahweh. They're talking about the Most High.
right.
So it's not too hard to figure out in that particular case. Hollywood, we've been saying for years and decades in Israel, actually, not even years, but decades, about them knowing this truth and how they throw subliminal things for those who are able to catch on and see what it is and what's going on in that particular realm. So we
You
want to
know,
sit
just
there and Tom Sheik, brother.
yeah, I was gonna say, just to touch on that. A few years back, there was a and you can probably still check it out, but I believe they watered the website down a little bit since then. But a few years back, there was a website called slavevoyages.org. And what that website was derived from was there were a lot of families in places like Virginia, especially it was mostly in Virginia, but different southern states where they had those ports. Some in Charleston, where as they're them cleaning out their houses, what they would find is they would find these manuscripts and these ship documents and these ship logs, and when you open the ship logs from uh, those boats that they found in these attics that were covered with dust, what they found is they found the names of slaves. They found the names of the cargo and the different slaves that were placed on the boat. And if you look at those names, some they've changed it and to make it more clear. But you see the original writing of it, and many of the names of those slaves that came over across the Atlantic Ocean have what you would call like Hebrew names, names like Moshe, names like Shalomo, names like Yehonatan, and literally spelled in that manner. So that's one of the things that if you get a chance, take a look at it. It's one of the things that you'll see that kind of qualifies some of the statements that are made of the Hebraic culture that they had even coming through the transatlantic slave trade in the Middle Passage.
King. Definitely appreciate that information. So slavevoyages.com. We don't want this to be watered down or minimalized. One of the presidents said that it was their duty to try to erase that history of what happened. Let's go on, if we will, to the next slide. All right, what you see there on the right side is a thumb screw. Now, when you watch, yes, it's the Hollywood version, but when you watch the movie Roots, there's a part in there where it was said that 18 thumb screws, and the guy was on there like, oh my gosh, this is what they actually doing. The kind of torture and the kind of inhumane things that happen with us as a people,
Right.
we're talking about taking teeth out like George Washington used to do to his slaves. We're talking, I have to ask you to excuse my language because I want to cite it as they did. They used to put gunpowder in a black man's anus, blow it up, and say blast in the black's ass. They used to hang the woman upside down. Do you think it's a baby as a boy or girl and cut the stomach open and then step on the head of it? They used to sit there and cut the vaginal canal out and wear it around them as a forehead and a trophy. They used to sit there and kick the black man's head around as a soccer ball. And so these are things that some of the stuff that actually sadly happened with us as a people, we do not want to sit there and have it to be forgotten. I first heard of the Maroons in Jamaica when I would say I was about maybe 14. And I read about it in a book called History of Slavery by Suzanne Everett. And I was like, wow, slavery was in Jamaica too that hard. Then I began to find out what exactly was going on in that particular case and in that particular realm. You understand? So I'm going to ask the brother here, what motivated you to want to study, then expound on the matter of slavery?
Slavery is an interesting topic. When you look at, and again, I look at everything from today's perspective, and I work backwards. And so you wonder sometimes why, when you look at our people, we have a hard time doing certain things. Our people, we have this hard time adjusting to the American dream and building wealth and buying homes and all of those different things. We have such a difficult time doing that, but yet other nationalities come here and they thrive and they're able to do it right away. And it makes you wonder how. And when you actually start to research, one of the things that they're doing and they're talking more about now is that they're doing studies on the descendants of the transatlantic slave trade. And what they're now starting to acknowledge is that those descendants of the slave trade, have suffered like a major PTSD related to slavery. When it comes to, and some of the things that you would think is normally us, which really isn't us. The fear that we have as it relates to that we still have as it relates to our oppressor and our captor, that you see all the time. The fact of when you went through certain years of like in the 70s and the 80s, and you see how children were beat with belts and extension cords and all of those different things. And to us, to our parents, it was discipline. But what that is that's a direct result of what was done to us when we were beat with belts and we were beat with whips and all of those different things. And in all in the name of discipline. And so when you look at those types of things, as well as the issues where we have a hard time coming together, we have a hard time establishing ourselves, just all of those different things that we have a hard time doing, which no other nationality in the world has such a hard time doing it, such as us. Those are the things that made me want to look into slavery even more. So when you look at the historical aspect of it and you start to go through it, you see that a lot of the things that we were subject to in slavery are the same things that we do to each other now.
Kane, I definitely would like to land back, told out for that info, Zaccar. When you can hear a parent say to a child, I'm going to beat the black off of you, really? I'm going to beat the black off of you. If that doesn't sound like something from the matter of slavery, or telling your child, this is no disrespect to our mothers, our fathers, our grandparents, who definitely had love for us. And even in the scriptures, it talks about the rod, but that's not always a physical one. It's just like the Most High bringing Israel under the rod of correction. That is an extreme case when Babylon and then Assyria came. You understand? But when the aspect of I'm going to bust your A because you dropped the ice cream, get over here, you little N, and all of that kind of stuff like that. Some of those things have been passed on and have affected even how parents raise their children. And I'm going to get a little personal, if I may. My mother, may she rest in peace, she told me about how her great grandmother, which is my great great grandmother. Now, my great 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 grandmother was a slave known in the family until the year 1865 when it was made illegal. You understand? But my grandmother, my mother's mother's mother, used to beat her daughter by having her between her legs with her behind out and just with the belt just hitting it like that. So looking at it, you understand in that particular case, the style and the formation that some even people in their 60s talk about how their parents used to give them relay beatings. One beats you until they get tired and then the other one start. That right there just goes to show you where the mentality came into play at. You understand? It becomes a thing of when Moshe or Moses in the Torah speaks about teach your children, what many parents, no disrespect, have done as winded up beating their children. I'm going to screw you up. We're not even going to say that F word. You understand? Those tactics and that spirit is what you bring to your enemy, not to your seed. So just using that, say, as an example, we need to just want to point this out. Maybe we could change it for the future in this particular case. All right, if we can go on to the next slide, thank you. Zaccar Ben Dan speaking on slavery and politics. Brother, what do you say is the political motivation for slavery and the ending of it in the Western Hemisphere?
You know, a lot of times we consider slavery as being a topic of discussion right around the Civil War, around the 1850s, when it had become a major issue and they were supposed to stop. And, you know, you actually trace it back to what 1808, which was the time when the agreement was that they would no longer import African slaves. So that didn't make slavery illegal. That was just the agreement that they would no longer import slaves from Africa in 1808. But the you see major spiritual and social conflict regarding slavery, even at the time in the 1760s with the Declaration of Independence, because there was a point where they were concerned that the Declaration of the Independence wouldn't be signed because you had so much opposition to slavery because they said, well, how can we make a statement like every man is created equal, but yet we still have slaves? So at the last minute, right before they were looking to ditch the Declaration of Independence, then you had an agreement that came about between the state of South Carolina and I forget which other state that came in at the time. And so they saved the Declaration of Independence. And part of the agreement that they made was that they would no longer import slaves in 1808. But when you if you look at like Thomas Jefferson, and Thomas Jefferson had plenty of slaves. If you remember a few years back, Thomas Jefferson, there was a there was a lady who had came out and said she was a descendant of Thomas Jefferson and one of the slave mistresses that he had. But when you read some of the speeches that Thomas Jefferson gave, you'll see that Thomas Jefferson actually spoke against slavery, and he spoke about how the continued implementation of slavery and holding these African captives in bondage, how that was going to cripple and end up bringing America to a point where they would change forever. And those words proved to be prophetic because that's exactly what happened in the with the Civil War in 1865. So if you look and you actually research some of those disagreements with slavery, they actually date back to before the United States was actually established as a country.
Okay. I definitely respect your answer on that. To land back, because we don't piggyback in Israel, on what the brother said regarding Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson had over 500 or so slaves. The image that you see on the back of the nickel, that was his slave plantation in Monticello, New York. So it's not too hard to figure why he spoke on one thing. And when he became president in the 1800s, the third president of the United States, he made it illegal. Louisiana already having been involved with the slave trade, wanting to go against America and such. So we just want to point that out for reference purposes. The image that you see there on the left side of the screen is that of the people that was brought as the known last slave ship into what we call Alabama of today. The slave ship called, and I'm going to type it in, the Clotilde slave ship. All right. And you can look that up and see what that's talking about. There's a thing called Africa Town in Alabama where it speaks upon that particular matter. So let us continue on in this presentation. Thank you. All right. Zaccar Ben Dan and the matter of the captives. What would you say about they who say black people sold black people?
So, one of the things, and I'm going to get to the question, but one of the things about the American language and propaganda and so on and so forth is actually very interesting because the American language, just like most languages, when you use words and when you say things, there's an intention behind it. And sometimes you don't really know what the intention is, but there's that intention behind it. So, in theory, when you look at it, yes, black people sold black people, but that's actually not is somewhat of a disingenuous statement to make because it doesn't really reflect what happened. So when you talk about the Portuguese, right? The Portuguese were literally the first to start importing slaves on a large scale. There was this issue where they had problems with the Ottoman Empire. They couldn't. One of the reasons that they started looking for routes to go um, to the east was because the Muslims at the time, this was heavy between the Crusades, and the Muslims at the time they just had a lock on the entire Middle East. So a lot of those European countries had to go around. So what the Portuguese did was, as they were going around and they started to hit these shores in Africa, mainly like Angola, Senegal, and a lot of those ports, what would happen is the Portuguese themselves would go in and they would pay tribal chiefs to go and grab slaves from the interiors of Africa, because the Portuguese and most Europeans didn't go into the interiors of Africa. So they did it two different ways. Sometimes they would pay the villages to go in and take captives of other villages. And in other cases, what they would do is they would literally give guns to the African villages or the African tribes, and they would create conflict between the two tribes just so that the tribes could fight each other. And then the winning tribe, which was an African tribe, would go and take another quote unquote African tribe, all black people, and then they would sell them to the Portuguese. So in essence, yeah, the concepts of blacks selling blacks is true. But when you look at it from a reality perspective, Africans have nations. Africa has nations, just like Europe has nations. So when you look at the nations in Africa, you look at nations like the Egyptians, the Ethiopians, those from Carthage, Tunisia, which is, where Hannibal was from, and a lot of the other Canaanite nations. So just like Africa has nations, just like Europe has it, so does Africa. And yet, when you look at the
Right.
European side of it, you don't see where they say whites enslaved other whites, even though you know that the British had the Irish and the Scottish as indentured servants for years. But yet, those countries, the English, the Scottish, the Irish, were all able to maintain their national identity, while those in Africa were all identified as blacks or all identified as Africans. And so you change the narrative a bit just by the way you phrase the statement that you make. And the last thing that I'm just going to touch on related to that is there was a Washington Post article a few years back, and as they started to do the research on history, one of the things that they determined is that the slaves that were brought over all represented one ethnic group, not many different ethnic group as they previously believed. So what that means is the African chiefs didn't take their tribe and sell their people. They sold the people who were at war with, which was another nation. And hence that's how a lot of us who were brought from the interiors of Africa to the coast and sold to the Portuguese and then to the other nations, that's how we got here.
Kane, my brother, thank you for that info. Definitely appreciate it. Again, when you check the description, you're going to see the video link in there that made me even want to ask the brother Zaccar to go over this. All right, it's dated on the DCB channel. I'm going to type that in, DCB channel, and that particular video is dated to 2/27/21. It's done on the Shabbat. And it was very, very, very well put together. And definitely wanted to support in that particular case. So let's go on to the next slide. What you see there is Cape Coast, Elmina Castle in Ghana, where they used to have the people stocked up in there and then put onto the first boat, then to the ship itself. All right. Zaccar Ben Dan on They Who Survive. Brother, what can be said of the people who survived the matter of the Middle Passage and then were enslaved in the Western Hemisphere?
So we talked about that. I touched on it earlier as related
Yes.
to the PTSD, but one of the major things that you find that the slave trade did is for all of us who were descendants of the slave trade, we actually lost our entire identity and our entire sense of self. And it that becomes a very depressing thing when you can look at other people and other nationalities that they can clearly articulate where they come from, and the only reference that you have, and the only point of reference that you have, is my ancestors were slaves. So that actually does something to you mentally. Um, what I'm actually working on is I'm working on a documentary that I'm hoping to put out within about 9 months or so, in time for the next Black History Month in 2023. And the documentary is called Before These Shores. And what I'm actually doing is I'm actually backtracking from a historical perspective using historical reference and historical reference and different articles and different things that were written, because what I believe is that when you do that backtrack from current day history to ancient history, you're going to find that somehow those those descendants of the transatlantic slave trade, their culture and their heritage and lineage relates not just back to Africa, but actually back to Israel. And when you look at there's this portion, chapter in Deuteronomy 28, and if you read Deuteronomy 28 in in full, you'll see that there are a lot of prophecies in Deuteronomy 28 that directly happen to those descendants of the transatlantic slave trade, including the slave trade itself. And so when you take a look at that and you read through it, you see a lot of correlation between the two. And you look at it and you see that that was Moses speaking to the children of Israel, where God told them these are going to be the things that happened if you don't obey God. And again, I know a lot of times when people hear God, then they start to, but just you get a chance, just try to take a look at it from a human perspective and compare some of the things that were written in Deuteronomy 28 to the transatlantic slave trade and those of us descendants from it.
Okay, my brother. If we can be heard clearly, give us a 1. Thank you for that. Now, what you're seeing there, New York Daily Tribune, Tuesday, November 6, 1860. And while the brother was speaking, I wanted to highlight about the slave ship called Erie, or Erie, whatever. Erie. It was a slave ship, brothers and sisters, that, as we read here, it says the Erie, which was a ship, is the vessel which was captured off the coast of Africa with 900 slaves on board who were sent to Monrovia. On the top, it says the slave of Erie condemned and ordered to be sold. The United States, whatever that word is, the ship Erie, and then it goes on and on. Why did I point this out here? Because when people say, can you prove of anything of there being a ship? This is the New York Tribune. So it's not too hard to figure out exactly what it is. That's from a newspaper article dated to the 1860s. So the concept, the ideology, the thought pervading, now mind you, as stated, we're not saying that all Black people in the Western Hemisphere are the descendants of the slave trade. We're not saying that. We're saying the bulk is.
Absolutely.
And what we will notice is they who say there were no ships and we were, quote, already here, the we who were here don't have a language, a land, a culture, and so forth and so on. So I want to state to the brothers and sisters who say they are indigenous to this land, your argument is not with the said African American. We was not brought here and then made treaties with you and then broke them. So your argument to the said Black American or to the said African American, your argument must be diverted somewhere else, because we are saying that we descended from the tribes, just as the brother Zaccar pointed out, not only say West Africa, but mainly going back into the line of the house of Israel. And this is not to be dogmatic or arrogant. I wanted to show real quick the book that I wrote, Deuteronomy 28, History Untold to the Masses. The brother who made this cover is a brother named Yeshiah Ben Dan, another Danite brother, if we will. You understand? So we want to be interdependent of each other and showing how one hand washes the other. We are each other's most valuable resources and things of that kind of nature. So I am glad that the brother is working on a project called Before the Shores, and I hope and pray the Most High cause it to be a success. Now, the guy who did this with the slave ship called Erie, his name was Nathaniel Gordon. I'm going to type his name in so you can look it up when you get the time. His name was Nathaniel Gordon. And he was hung by the orders of Abraham Lincoln on the charge of slavery. So you can look that up and see what it is as far as it goes in that particular case. Nathaniel Gordon was executed by the orders of Abraham Lincoln under the charge of slave trading. Now, as the brother Zaccar pointed out, slavery wasn't made illegal in 1807, 1808. The slave trade itself internationally was made such. So these are things we just want to point out for edification purposes. All right, let's go on, if we will, to the next slide. Zaccar Ben Dan.
If you don't mind, if I can just, I just want to add something to what you said, because I know it's a very interesting point when you start to talk about Native Americans and the people who indicate that we were already here. When you actually research a couple of the slave ships, especially with the Spanish had a colony off of South Carolina in the 1500s. And one of the reasons that they say that that colony failed was because when the African slaves got to South Carolina who were brought by the Spanish, they were actually able to communicate with the Native Americans that were already in South Carolina. And it also happened in Spain, which colony was it? It wasn't Cuba, I believe it was Puerto Rico, or it may have been in Hispaniola, where what the colonizers would do is they would use the African slaves to communicate with the natives. And it just kind of makes you wonder, how would the African slaves be able to communicate with the natives if the African slaves came from Africa and the natives were already here? So when you start to speak and you start to research the Hebrew roots in a lot of these Native Americans, you'll actually see that they are a lot of similarities in their culture that relate to the culture that the African slaves came and brought over here when they came.
Very true. Torah about for that. Kohen Mikael, my Hebrew teacher, he did a speech in a place that was called the Slave Theater, which was located in Brooklyn. And in it, he said that there are Native Americans that celebrate the days of what we see and understand as Shavuot and Sukkot, which is the Feast of Weeks and the Feast of Booths. When the natives were met by the Europeans, there were instances in which, just like the guy Luis Torres was the Hebrew translator used by Christopher Columbus. So these are just things we want to point out for reference purposes. Now, Christopher Columbus was called Cristobal Colombre, and he worked for Queen Isabella and Ferdinand. These are the grandparents of Charles V of Spain. Charles V of Spain, giving thanks to the Most High, as I pointed out in my book, Israelite History as it relates to the world, knew and spoke of the Israelites that was in Carthage. Part of the Carthaginian people in northern Tunisia were Hebrew Israelites, or Hebrews, or Israelites, if we will. So that dates all the way back to the Punic Wars. But taking it back now to the era of Charles V of Spain, he was one noted that he knew of the Israelites that was there at that particular time. So in this particular case, looking at this picture here, dated to July 1839 with the Amistad, the brother spoke about Spain. Amistad is a Spanish word meaning friendship. Excuse me for belching. And they made a movie as pointed out regarding this. But I'm going to ask if the brother can speak about the Treaty of Tordesillas with Spain and Portugal dated from 1494. Thank you.
Okay. So the Treaty of Tordesillas. So Spain and Portugal were actually one country at one time on the Iberian Peninsula, and then they actually separated out. But they remain cordial. And what the Treaty of Tordesillas was Portugal actually started to explore further south in the Atlantic first. And as Portugal started to find a lot of these, I don't want to say discover a lot of these countries, but start to dock in a lot of these countries, what would happen is when they would come back, so it's actually referenced in historical documents that Portugal actually brought slaves back to Portugal from the Ivory Coast as early as like the 1440s. And so as those slaves started to come back to Portugal in the 1440s, and Portugal and Spain started to converse, so what they actually did was they made the decision that as they started to branch out, what would happen is they were literally going to cut the world in half. And everything to the west of this line, the Spanish were able to conquer, and everything to the right of that, the Portuguese were able to conquer. And where that line actually falls, it actually falls literally just at the edge of Brazil. So that's why when you actually look at the slave trade for what it is, you see the Portuguese um, colonized Brazil and everything east of Brazil. So the Portuguese received all of those African countries, Angola, Senegal, the Congo, so on and so forth. And Spain colonized those west of that line, which is the Caribbean islands, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, Mexico, Central America, and as I mentioned, Spain actually was the first to colonize in the continental North America. They were the first to do it. So that's actually what the Treaty of Tordesillas is that they just Spain and Portugal, who are the only ones, who are the major ones doing slave trade at that time, they basically cut the world in half.
Okay, my brother. Thank you for that.
If I can I'm sorry, I just want to add one more thing to it because
please do talk.
This actually brings a very interesting component. One of the major conditions of the Treaty of Tordesillas, and it actually goes along with the papal bull of the 1400s. The papal bull, what it does was it actually is a bulletin from the Vatican, from the Pope, which actually legalized slavery and gave Spain and Portugal the opportunity to be able to take slaves who were actually prisoners of war and take them as slaves. And one of the other component of the Treaty of Tordesillas is that the treaty stipulated that any land that had a Christian ruler or a Christian monarch at the time, those lands would not be colonized. And when you actually look at it, they ended up colonizing Cuba. They ended up colonizing parts of the continental U.S. They end up colonizing Hispaniola, Portugal, and the colonies which the Portuguese took in the Ivory Coast of Africa. That lets you know that Christianity was not the native language of any of those native people where they actually colonized, because they would not have been able to do it if it was a Christian nation, according to the Treaty of Tordesillas.
Definitely true. Appreciated and respected, my brother. To land back on what the brother's saying, there was a thing that was given with Charles V called the Asiento. And in it, that was the wicked. It was a legal document that was used in order to sit there and do trade with that kind of matter. We want to talk about why this in part is done. Recently, within, say, I would say 10 years, round off in time, they're trying to say that the first slaveholder in America was a black man named Anthony Johnson. In the book, Slavery in the Making of America by Horton and Horton, you can look that book up, Slavery in the Making of America by Horton and Horton. It says that the guy that is known in history as Anthony Johnson died in 1670, and the land that he did have in Virginia was given back to the Caucasians or the Europeans, or for the lack of a better term, to the enslavers or the white people. And so to say that a man in 1655 was the pioneer of American slavery, as some try to say, maybe they didn't think that people would read about John Punch. John Punch was made a legal slave permanently in the year 1640, which is 15 years before the matter of Anthony Johnson. So you can look that up on your own. The date of 1619 is, we must remember, is we're talking, say, Virginia became a colony in 1607. So by the time 1619 comes, we're talking, say, round off about 12 years later. I want to ask a question, and this is to anyone, and I state this in due respect. When they start talking about the guy that went to Jamestown, Virginia in 1619 with 20 black people as slaves, what made that guy comfortable to go to Virginia as a Dutchman when it's a British colony? If Virginia in 1619 was already a British colony since 1607, what made a Dutchman, knowing that the Portuguese and Dutch were at war at times, knowing that the Dutch and the British were at war, what made this Dutchman of war, John Wolfe and company, be comfortable to do business with each other unless the slave trade was already in focus before 1619? That's why we have to understand there was Spanish America, Louisiana being part of that, Florida. The word Florida comes from the Spanish word meaning for flowery, like a flower. And then you have brothers and sisters, as the brother pointed out, you have Lucas Vacas Alone in South Carolina working for the judge in the Dominican Republic in 1526 named Louis Vacas Alone in what we call South Carolina today. So we want to point these kind of things out because they're trying to minimalize this and want this to be suppressed. But they can never, ever, after trying to say forgive and forget, you have to admit the wrong first in order to know what you're being forgiven for. You cannot act like everything was okay and you're going to remain silent on something and then sit there and ask for forgiveness. What are you asking for forgiveness for while you don't want things to be known? What you're trying to do is alleviate your conscience of it. And so this is something that Andrew Jackson, he said, and quote, he fears for his country when he reflects that God is just. Andrew Jackson, yes, him. The one on the $20 bill, the one who was Trump's hero, role model, if you will. The one who went against the Senate in the court and did the Trail of Tears in the 1800s, that same guy, him. So just want to point that out for reference purposes, if you will. We're going to go on to the next slide. Thank you. All right. Zaccar Ben Dan on the matter of the presidents. Do you have anything to say of the 12 presidents who did have slaves?
I mean, not much. One of the things that I'll just touch on is that this country has a history, and I don't want to. I want to make sure that I phrase this properly. This country has a history of being hypocritical as it relates to a lot of different things. So the fact that Thomas Jefferson was speaking against slaves, yet he had them. The fact that you this document of the Declaration of Independence spoke about with liberty and justice for all, and all men are created equal, and yet all people are created equal, and yet um, they still held on to slavery for literally another 70 years. Those it just shows you. I know they speak about it and they talk about the uh the presidents and still being men and still being human. That's why, I mean, this country is what it is. That's why when it comes to the removing of statues, where they're removing some statues, but they're not removing other statues, it almost seems a bit disingenuous, and as a means to just kind of continue to pacify. Because if you're going to start to remove statues for people who had some sort of a impact on slavery, then again, you're going to erase the most of the presidents, the ones that are on the $1 bill and on the $20 bill, and you're going to be taking down statues, and you're going to be changing the names of colleges and streets and bridges and all of those different things. So the fact that they had slaves is acknowledged. Um, to to try to speak to that in any sort of a detail, it doesn't make sense, because it's almost a sense of, it is what it is. We need to get past certain things, and for us, I think the goal of our people should be more towards the forward progress, and not looking back and finding things to hold on to hold us back, waiting for us to change, waiting for this country to change something that they have no intention of changing on a large scale. So I don't speak much about it. I mean, it happened. It is what it is. Um, Not too much comment on it.
Kane, understood and respected, my brother. If we see on the list there, Washington over 300. And the reason why I had this put into the PowerPoint is to expose a particular truth regarding this particular matter. If we look very meticulously, right, at the pin, if we will, let me get back here, sorry. I'm gonna do the highlighter, right? But I'm gonna do the highlighter real quick with the time allotted in red. Now, we see here Johnson and Grant. Historically, Johnson was the vice president of Abraham Lincoln in the second term. Grant was the 18th president. Johnson became president after Lincoln was assassinated. Now, mind you, Lincoln
Right.
was assassinated on the Shabbat during the Feast of
Right.
Unleavened Bread on April 15th. April 15th, or April 14th, and he passed away on the 15th. On the Shabbat during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, when you deal with the standard calendar. Now, one thing to be pointed out with this particular matter is that how is it that they were supposedly against slavery while still encouraging it? So to collaborate, yes, with the brother Zaccar stated, I love history, but it is a matter too of looking forward, because they're not going to change. But we want it to be noted for reference purposes exactly what it was about. One of the things they try to say is the second and the sixth president were not endorsing slavery, but yet John Adams, the second president, did not sit there and speak against it. He just may have not participated, say, within himself, but he certainly enjoyed that house that became Washington, where was built by people, even Michelle Obama said, built by slaves. So these are things to be pointed out for reference and edification purposes. Let's go on, if we will, to the next slide, and we're going to close out. Zaccar Ben Dan on Spain and the Hebrews. Now, Pinckney's Treaty of 1795. Spain, worried of an Anglo-American alliance, moved for a treaty. Free navigation of Mississippi gave U.S. territory over Florida that had been disputed since the Revolutionary War. What is called Florida, as we pointed out of today, was a property of Spain, and it was involved in the slave trade ever since the 1500s.
Right.
1565, and what they call St. Augustine of today. So we just want to point that out. We do know that Spain was heavy in the Atlantic slave trade. We too know, according to Suzanne Everett, that the Portuguese I typed that wrong, sorry, in 1891 destroyed their slave records. Could it be said that in spirit, our ancestors who were enslaved spiritually connect to the captives Hebrews in Egypt then later? That is my question to you.
I'm sorry, just repeat that last part.
No problem. The question is, without our people having the ability to read, how is it possible, if it is possible, I'm presenting in spirit, that our people who were captive by the British, the French, and the Spaniards, how were they able to spiritually connect to the Hebrews, saying the Hebrews in Egypt, the Hebrews in Babylon, and so forth and so on?
Gotcha. Yeah, well, it's like I mentioned earlier, when you look at the so you have this book that was written, the Hebrewisms in West Africa. When they studied a lot of the tribes in Jamaica, the slaves in Jamaica, they noticed that the tribes in Jamaica actually had bore a lot of similarities, a lot of Hebraic culture and similarities. A lot of the Native Americans in parts of South America also bore a lot of Hebraic tendencies. They spoke about Torah. They actually said that they were from the tribes of Asher and Manasseh, and those were things that different explorers had documented throughout their travels. So when you look at slave voyages, like I mentioned earlier, most of the names of the slaves, when you looked at those documents, they all had Hebrew names. So the reason that they can bear and speak to the Hebraic aspect of those things is because that's the language that they spoke when they were brought over here. And when you look at the linguistics from in Africa, when you start to look at the sub-Saharan languages and you see so many different Hebrew words, normally Egyptian words and Aramaic words and Arabic words, along with Hebrew words, sound the same. But that wasn't always the case when it came to sub-Saharan Africa. However, what started to happen as the children of Israel started to migrate further and further with the invasion of the Romans, they started to migrate further and further. So you start to see, those Hebraic practices even as far as Ethiopia. And so when it comes to those different things, the names and the slave trades and all of those, the Hebrew was still a prominent language that they spoke, even when they started to, even up until when they stopped pulling slaves from the Ivory Coast, which was literally late 1800s, even though the agreement was that they were supposed to stop in 1808, they still found a lot of these Hebraic practices. There was one article that I have, and I believe I put it in one of my presentations, where they were in Connecticut and they found a slave in Connecticut, and the slave in Connecticut talked about Sabbath. The slave in Connecticut talked about speaking Hebrew, and had he himself talked about Torah, and that was all the way in 1800s Connecticut. So a lot of the slaves that came over here had these Hebraic cultures, these Hebraic ideologies. When they spoke of things like when they sung, "Go down Moses," "Way down in Egypt land," and all of those different things. Those were staples, some of the staples, quote unquote, Negro spirituals that you see. And the reason is that because when they came over, they had these Hebraic practices that was in them. Hebraic culture was in them, and the point that it started to go away is when they were forced to now learn English. They were forced to now take on Christianity, and now the Hebraic concept and the concept of Torah starts to go away.
Okay, thank you for that, my brother. I want to land back on what the brother said right before we close out. And that's this. There was a guy named Gustus Vasa, and his other name from out of Africa was Olud Equiano. And he stated that a lot of the customs of his people, the Igbo, all right, go back to, quote, pardon the term, the Jews of the Old Testament. From circumcision to sacrifices to the Hebraic way to the ceremonies to the rites, RITES. So you can look that up in a book called The Slave Community by John Blassingame. You can get that book online, or Not Trying to Be Salesman. You can get the same citation from the book I wrote, which is also available online. Thank you to the people who patronized. And it speaks about Oluda Equiano and what he was saying about that particular matter and so forth and so on. So there was actually a church in the South that the people in the congregation there were found writing upon ancient Hebrew on the pews. But they tried to one time say, well, it doesn't matter if it was an ancient Hebrew. Let's bring all the info out, and wherever you and your spirit resonates with, don't try to sit there and suppress it. Let's sit there and bring this out for edification purposes, because not trying to be funny and not trying to sound arrogant. My Hebrew teachers, Kohen Mikael, may the Most High bless him and continue to strengthen him. Moreh Mishael, may the Most High make him rest in peace. Moreh Hosea, may the Most High make him rest in peace. Ima Tamikia, may the Most High continue to bless her life. Ima Shoshana Bat Levi, who helped me even to want to write a book spiritually regarding the language and so forth and so on. So looking at it like that, just this week, when I was seeing a guy who was like Jewish or whatever, and I said, my Shalom Kai, his question is, Madua Ata Medaber Ibri, without even answering me how you doing, he's going to sit there and ask me, why am I speaking Hebrew? Because it was not supposed to have been known to us. It's something that we were never expected to find out. So let's go on to the next slide and close out. All right. Zaccar Ben Dan speaks on history. In a video you did at the congregation DCB, you spoke of the following dates from 1499 to 1565 of places where slavery existed from Colombia to Florida. Can it be said that since all of them predated 1619, in the matter of Anthony Johnson, a black man as the first slave owner in America, is a myth? I know I spoke on it earlier, but Tom Sheik, before we close out, thank you for the time again, Aki.
Okay, no problem. And so the thing about America in 1619, and actually 2 years ago in 2019, this became a major debate. So before I get into that debate, I'll just tell you that South Carolina was colonized by the Spanish in 1526. Florida was colonized by the Spanish in 1565.
Bring it out.
So that was long before the 1619 when the British came. So the thing about America is that America is based, and the America's definition of slavery, a history of slavery, is based on from an Anglo-Saxon perspective. And it comes about because the Anglo-Saxons came in 1619, and then that's when they brought the 20 or so, as the quote reads that you read on Jamestown, Virginia, the 20 or so odd slaves, which some of which they then turned around and repurposed and took them over to Bermuda. But it's from an Anglo-Saxon perspective. So they completely disregard the Spanish who were here first in 1526 and in 1565. And so they completely disregard that. So to try to make the statement that anything related to slavery was a first in 1619 is actually inaccurate. And as I was mentioning, when they had the 400-year anniversary in 2019, that was one of the major criticism that they received, was that they said that what you're doing by acknowledging this as the 400 years of slavery, what you're doing is you're completely discounting the entire state of Florida,
Bring it out.
whose colonization occurred, what is that, about 60 plus years before the British. The British were actually one of the last to get into the slave trade. It was the Spanish, it was the Portuguese first, and then the Spanish, who was colonizing in the 1400s and all through the 1500s. The British didn't actually begin colonizing until the 1600s, over 150 years later. And then the Anglo-Saxons and the Dutch started to come after that. And again, they speak about slavery and not taking slaves from Africa after 1808. and if I'm not mistaken, the British decree was to stop taking them before 1808. They were literally still pillaging Africa all the way into the late 1800s and some in the 1900s. And after they took all of those strong, able-bodied people, men and women and children out of Africa, that's when they went back in and went in and suppressed it and colonized Africa and started to pull the resources from it, because at that point you had taken close to 100 million people out of Africa, and now the people that were left, there was no chance that they would be able to defend themselves because you took a lot of the strong and empowered men of Africa. So you read about 8 to 10 million, but most historians will say that about 30 to 40 million came over, and 60 million or so died in the Atlantic Ocean in the trip.
Okay, thank you for that, my brother, for the information. It's definitely respected and appreciated. On the right side of the screen, Massachusetts was the first state to recognize it legally in 1641. Connecticut, 1650. Virginia, 1661. Maryland, 1663. New York and New Jersey, 1664. And you can see the dates there. All right, those dates, I got that from the book called Before the Mayflower by LaRon Bennett Jr. And I wanted to point that out because that is the colonized matter of America and so forth and so on. So this is no disrespect to any brother or sister of the house of Israel. But if we know ourselves as the house of Israel, and we know that our new year starts when they're doing their thing, say in March or April, we cannot take the prophecy of Abraham being told 400 years and then apply it to the Western Hemisphere
Right.
from 1619 to 2019, right, because then again,
Not
you
accurate.
have
Right.
complete cut off. First, the calendar is different between Hebrew and America. Then you have completely cut off those that was beforehand. So we don't want to be a false prophet, giving people false hopes of a date that doesn't happen. And now it's 2022, and we still got to cut this at a time because we still got to punch the clock at 9 a.m. So we don't want to sit there and say that your due date of your deliverance was already in 2019, and
Right.
then you still going to work under that for one man to pay another man so you can sit there and keep a roof over your head. So we want to keep it more upright than that. So let's continue on and close out. Thank you again, Akeem, for the time. Now, this is the last slide. Do you have any final words or thoughts regarding the Atlantic slave trade and history of slavery in the Western Hemisphere? Torah.
The only thing that I would close with is that they have this proverb or this saying that says those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. And while I don't know if that's 100% applicable, if that's applicable here, what I do know is that when we understand exactly where we came from and why we were brought here, that allows us a better chance to become spiritually connected to our creator. So atheism is a fairly new phenomenon. Spirituality and the worship of a supreme being is something that was that's in us throughout. You see how we worship, you see how we praise. It's something that's built within us. And if we can take the worship and praise aspect of it, and we can connect it with the identity aspect of it to understand who we are and why we're here and what our obligation is to our creator, then I think that allows us to, one, develop ourselves to be better, and then that allows us to be able to develop the rest of our people to be better. And then maybe, just maybe, some of the things that we see that we're experiencing, the high rate of crime amongst us, the us being taken advantage of, us being persecuted, and all of those different things that we are actually now doing to us. Maybe when we add the spiritual aspect and the identity aspect, maybe we can start to all learn to care for each other like we should, and learn to better ourselves. You know, it's a lot to be said when you call somebody a brother or a sister versus the N word. And when you realize
Mhm.
exactly how slavery went, slavery was a ship that dropped you off in Cuba, it dropped you off in Puerto Rico, it dropped some off in England and in Jamestown, and then it took them over to Bermuda and dropped them off in Bermuda. So when you see that we're actually all the same people, and you actually are able to use the term brother instead of
Right.
the N word and the other proverbs which they called us, then you know it allows you to get closer to each other through better understanding and real and compassion.
Respected. I appreciate the time, brother, that you allowed yourself to be on the channel. On a much deeper level, I give honor and praise unto the Most High regarding being able to do this presentation. I'm going to put the link that you did at DCB, giving much respect to the congregation there. And I would like to also put the link to the books that I wrote regarding the matter of said slavery. One of the things in closing out is comes from this book, Todayah, that I wrote, From Assyria to America. From Assyria to America. And I pen named it in honor of my father. If you look very meticulously at this right here, this is who they call Flora, who was a slave in the 1700s inside brothers and sisters of Virginia. And why did I point that out? It comes from a book called From Slavery to Freedom, the 8th edition by Franklin Moss. It's a college book. And one of the things I wanted to show in pointing that out is the fact that in many, many cases, we cannot allow it to be suppressed. We want to not bear grudge. We want to understand why it happened and what to do to change the situation of us as a people. It is one thing to go over the history, which I again thank the brother for allowing the time to do so. It's one thing to go over the history. It's another whole matter to explain, as the brother Zaccar did. Read when you get the chance Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter, and see just if it correlates with what is called of today Black history in the situation that we're in, and so forth and so on. So while not attempting to offend anyone, while not attempting to belittle anyone, we definitely wanted to point this out for reference purposes. So I give thanks and praises unto the Most High. Thus ends the presentation. Thank you, my brother, for the time.
Amen.
Please,
Amen.
people, if you care to subscribe to the channel, and if you up for it, then we can have more interviews in time and so forth and so on.
Amen.
On this channel, I am going to create a willing, do a presentation tomorrow night regarding Israel and archaeology. All right, dated all the way to the time of ancient Assyria and so forth and so on. So again, 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time in America. Please subscribe to the channel, hit the bell. If you like it, please leave your comments and so forth and so on. And I do say in due respect, may the Most High bless the brother Zaccar and all of those in attendance and those who care to share it. If you disagree, leave it in the comments. If you use profanity, you will be blocked. And with that being the case, I say Todah for the time. Shalom, my
Amen.
brother. Thus ends the presentation.
Shalom. Amen. Be safe. Yeah, bless.
Thanks, you too.